Gray is a funny-looking skeleton who betrayed his master and joined the human world, where he somehow became the strongest holy paladin. It all began in the year 11,266. An unjust war occurred in the kingdom of Isaac. The king of Isaac was attacking the continent of Celts, led by a woman named Irene. However, Irene and her men found themselves on the verge of defeat, and the king offered to let them live if Irene were to renounce her right to the throne of the house of Becker. Irene thought the king was speaking out of his ass at first, but when he claimed he won't break his oath in front of thousands of people, she decided to chicken out. Irene asked her men to lay down their arms and do as the Big Daddy said, but the soldiers were hell-bent on serving her till they met their maker. She argued that the fate of this battle was already decided and there was no need for further sacrifices, prompting the men to finally listen to her. After thanking her men for being so loyal to her till the very end, she stood up yet again and pledged to fight till the end, as she could not live with herself if she turned her back on her homeland. As she charged onto the battlefield all by herself, the king ordered his soldiers to take her down. Just then, they heard a voice in the background, and Irene seemed to recognize it very well. As she turned around, she noticed her Magus simp Gray in his legendary knight armor, who was famous for taking out 100 men in a single blow. Alongside his squadron knights of the Silver Moon, Gray pledged allegiance to Irene and made an enemy of everyone who dared harm her. As he promised to fight for her honor to the death, he and his men charged into battle and submitted themselves as true paladins. Prior to this, in the peaceful port of the Celts, some guards show up and tell the people to get their asses out of there. Turns out an evil undead, like the ones in Dark Souls 3, has risen, which causes chaos among the residents. As they clear the market, the guards begin their search for this undead, who seems to be hiding behind some barrels. Just then, this funny-looking skeleton is startled by a talking cat who asks him why he's on the streets. After covering up the cat's face to prevent it from talking, the undead quickly realizes that it's not a talking cat, but rather a ghost possessing a cat's body. As they get acquainted, the cat is quick to realize that this stupid undead is on the ground for the first time, and asks him why he's not living in the abyss like every one of his kind. The undead says the abyss is a dangerous place, and one must possess some useful skill to survive there. However, he was a born loser, so he pretended to become a skeleton specimen to the great Lich Brutus to learn magic. The sorcerer was so dumb, he did not notice his existence for years, until one day, Brutus decided to transform the specimen into a skeleton soldier, so he could make him run errands. However, the undead pissed his pants and decided to run away, but not before destroying some of Brutus's apparatus. Not only that, but he also stole some of Brutus' treasure, including a gold ring, meaning that the Great Lich is out to get him now. This is why he escaped to the abyss and arrived at the ground. The talking cat is shocked to its core upon hearing his story and tells him to go his separate way, as he doesn't want to get involved in his miserable life. However, the undead drags him back and asks him why the humans are out to destroy him when he hasn't done anything to them. The cat realizes that this idiot doesn't even know how the undead are perceived in the human world, and reveals that their kind is seen as death and calamity, who would do anything to cause disasters. The undead questions why the humans aren't after him, since he's a ghost as well, and he says it is because he has possessed a cat, which is a universally loved creature. However, the undead fails to understand why humans pamper cats so much but not a walking skeleton like him, making the cat realize that this buffoon is helpless. Just as he takes his leave, the undead grabs him yet again and tells him that someone is entering through the man gate. Turns out it is Irene and her squadron of knights who have just entered the hamlet port. Irene comments on the strangeness of the city after seeing how all the houses are closed, but the guards show up and inform them of the situation regarding the undead. As they try to stop Irene and her squad, she bribes the guards by promising to put in a good word for them to Count Caspar, prompting them to clear the way. One of the knights asks his commander what's going on in the city, only to be told to not ask stupid questions, and that the port of Hamlet is about to change. The undead and the talking cat are watching this from behind the barrels, and the cat explains that these men are knights, who are considered the embodiment of justice and light. These knights bring justice to people, which is why people rally behind them. The undead is quite fascinated to learn about the knights, and when the cat asks him to return to the underground, he refuses and says that he will become a knight as well. This undead is none other than Gray, who will become one of the strongest and well-known paladins the world has seen. In the evening, Gray forces the talking Tom to accompany him and gathers a load of supplies that will help him become a knight. The cat isn't too convinced and says Gray will never be a knight simply by stealing an armor set from a smithy. However, Gray says he is already aware of that, which is why he has bought an idiot's guide to becoming a knight. The cat is extremely furious at the sheer idiocy of Gray and reminds him that one does not become a knight by reading a third-class novel. One needs a horse to even begin, and there is no horse in the world that would let a lich ride it. Gray is disappointed to learn the reality, but his spirit is not broken as he calls upon a great soul. Surrounded by a gust of wind and lighting, Gray manages to summon a Minecraft skeleton horse named Tenedos, who is shocked to see that he has become an undead. Meanwhile, Irene, the Duchess of Berbera, had finally arrived at Count Caspar's castle, who happens to be her uncle. After the formalities, Caspar drops a bombshell that he wants his son to marry Irene, and that is exactly why he has invited her here. However, Irene shows little interest and asks Caspar if he can help her inherit the Becker family's title. Caspar says that despite Irene's father's will, she might not be able to inherit the title because she has a brother who is an illegitimate child of her father. Irene says the man is simply a fraud, but Caspar refuses to acknowledge her and orders her to renounce her title so she can marry his son. He further says that the king agrees with the decision and Irene must do as she is asked. Irene quickly realizes Caspar's true colors and recalls how he made a vow to her father that he would remain loyal to him even after his passing. However, since Caspar has gone back on his word, Irene throws a handkerchief, which is a symbolic representation of initiating a duel. Meanwhile, the guards are still looking for Gray in the streets but are unable to find him. As he, Tenedo, and the talking cat hide in an alley, Gray decides to put on a knight's mask to conceal his undead identity. While the cat begs them to let him go, Gray ignores his pleas and tells Tenedos that they will need to make armor for him as well. The cat argues that they cannot become knights because knights are creatures of light, but Gray reminds him that he is able to produce holy light, which will allow him to join the light camp. After realizing that both Gray and Tenedos share the same malfunctioning brain cell, the cat wishes he would possess some other body before meeting them, prompting Gray to offer him an undead status. Hearing that, he quickly jumps back on his feet, stops complaining, and offers to assist Gray in becoming a knight, so he can get rid of him as soon as possible. Later, as the guards decide to call it a night, they come across Gray and Tenedos, who are now fully equipped in a knight's armor. Gray starts pissing his pants upon seeing them, but his disguise is so good that they don't even recognize him and simply tell him to stay off the streets as there is an undead looming around. After they leave, Gray praises himself for this brilliant disguise and also reveals that he is using magic to hold it together. With the armor covered, Gray sets his sights on finding a master who will train him to become an honorable knight. However, the cat has to sacrifice his brain cells to explain to him that people usually sleep at night. When he asks what they should do until sunrise, he tells him that they should head to the tavern where the knights usually hang out. Meanwhile, at the castle, Irene is set to duel Caspar the following morning, prompting his knight Horace to suggest resting for the night. Irene asks if he's worried because her decision was too impulsive, but Horace says it's because she agreed to unfavorable conditions for the duel. When Irene says Caspar would have never agreed to a fair fight, Horace aggressively suggests leaving the fort. However, Irene knows they have no choice but to take this duel since the king is planning on taking the Becker family's territory illegally and they won't stand a chance without Caspar's troops. Horace understands but still worries as Caspar has agreed to a turn-based battle between the two factions, and since they have only brought about 20 knights, they're bound to lose. However, Irene asks him to take her crest to hire a nearby mercenary group, and believes they can win if they deploy good tactics. She then asks her men to have faith in her and promises them the fruit of victory in exchange for their loyalty. Meanwhile, the undead squad arrives at the tavern and Gray recognizes this place as it's mentioned in the book he's reading. The cat asks him to act normal and order a glass of wine and a fish when he enters, stating that he must feed him in exchange for his help. As he enters, he is greeted by a chick with Fortnite chug jugs who takes him to the seat. Just then, a man asks his leader Paz if they can recruit this new face to their gang. Paz says that he doesn't let just anyone enter their group, the Red Scorpions, and that he will need to prove his worth first. On the other hand, Gray is ecstatic as the lady called him Mr. Knight, but the cat reminds him that it's common courtesy. He then asks if Gray has any money on him, prompting him to pull out a singular coin he took as a souvenir from Brutus. It will be enough to pay their bills for the night, but they will need to make more if they want to eat tomorrow. However, Gray notices some men gambling at the next table and proposes joining them so they can grab some quick cash. Sometime later, Paz and his guy notice people gathering around the gambling table as Gray is winning over and over again. Despite the talking Tom asking him to lose a few games to shake off the viewers, Gray is hellbent on winning as much as possible. Just then, a punk Jacksepticeye challenges his luck and dares Gray to wager 10 silver coins at a time. Despite warnings from the cat, Gray accepts the challenge as he's certain he won't lose. Later, the two leave the tavern with loads of money, and Gray explains that probability is a fundamental knowledge in the world of liches, which is why he is so good at gambling. Just as the cat tells him that winning all the time can cause problems in the human world, the gang of gamblers shows up demanding their money back. The cat asks Gray to make a run for it, but Gray decides to hold his ground as he now has Tenedos by his side. As he mounts the horse, the gamblers try to gang up on him, only to get their ass handed to them by the vicious duo. After the dust settles, all the gamblers are biting the dust, and the only person that remains standing is Gray. As the regulars, including Paz, are all shocked to see so much power in one person, Gray reveals that he used buffing magic to enhance Tenedos' abilities. The next day, people are gathered in a camp where a tournament will be held featuring Count Caspar. People wonder how his fat ass will do in a fight, but they soon learn that Caspar will have his knights represented in the tournament. Paz, now wanting Gray on his team, takes him to the tournament and reveals that someone has paid a lot of money for them to participate in it. He believes that they will win easily if Gray joins them, and since only knights can participate in the tournament, they have been assigned temporary titles by the lady who hired them. Meanwhile, Caspar reminds Irene that she will lose a lot of fame if she were to lose. When he mentions the reputation of the Becker family, Irene sternly tells him to leave her family matters to her. She promises to keep her vow if she loses, but also wants Caspar to stand by his words if she were to win. Later, the announcer explains that the tournament will consist of infantry and cavalry battles, which will be fought in a turn-based format, just like every shitty RPG mobile game. Each side will send a knight to the battlefield, and the match will continue until elimination or forfeit. The winner must accept the challenge of the opposing knight, but they will have the choice to do a horse battle or foot battle. Once all the knights on one team are eliminated, the other team will be declared the winner. One additional condition is that Caspar will pledge allegiance to Lady Irene if she wins, but in case she loses, she must marry his son at a later date. The announcer then brings forward Caspar's team, which consists of hundreds of knights, while Irene's team only has a few dozen. The people start calling Irene a fool for playing the number game and even start betting on the count to win. Caspar uses this opportunity to mock Irene and says he won't defeat her too badly to protect her honor. Irene ignores the fat bastard and asks Horace if the mercenaries have arrived, prompting him to reveal that the men are waiting outside. Just then, the tournament begins and Irene's knights manage to win the first 2 rounds. When they lose the 3rd round, Horace is more petrified than a statue in Medusa's garden and asks Irene to let him fight. However, Irene asks Horace to hold his horses and bring out the mercenaries, making him realize she wants to use them to exhaust the Count's knights. As he heads outside, he notices a group of mercenaries and reminds them about the importance of this match. However, the mercenaries are only 40 in number and aren't sure if they can win against hundreds on the other side. Among these mercenaries is Gray, who asks Horace to grant him the title of a knight. Horace reminds him that he's already been made a knight by Lady Irene, but Gray demands a real title instead of a temporary one. Before Horace can show him his place, Irene herself shows up and reveals that the title of knight is only granted by merit. She then says that if Gray were to defeat 50 opposing knights in the tournament, she would grant him the official title of knight. While the cat asks Gray to refuse since this is too much, the man goes against him like always and happily accepts. With that, Irene wishes him the best of luck and returns to her chambers. The cat then asks him if he's lost his mind, but Gray is confident he can easily win because Tenedos can take on 100 men. However, the cat reminds him that everyone so far is fighting on foot, and for him to use his horse, he'll need to win a battle on foot. Turns out, Gray missed the memo and now he's royally screwed. While he contemplates what to do, Irene arrives in the chambers and Caspar mocks her for relying on the Red Scorpion mercenaries, blaming such lowly actions on the decline of her family. Just then, Paz is ordered to enter the ring, and with the swag of a Greek god, he faces his opponent and defeats him with ease. After he wins 5 rounds in a row, Caspar starts worrying about who this man really is, prompting his butler to reveal that Paz is the leader of the mercenaries. To break Paz's momentum, Caspar sends a giant barbaric warrior who not only scares the other mercenaries but also intimidates Irene and Horus. While Paz contemplates whether he should fight or forfeit, Gray is out there struggling to lift his sword. As the 12th match begins, the giant attacks Paz with tremendous strength. He uses his smaller size to maneuver around him and slice him up. However, Paz is shocked to see that the man is unaffected by his attacks and sends him flying with one swing. With Paz's defeat, the mercenaries lose hope, while Caspar sits proudly in his chair, knowing all too well what this win means for him. However, against all odds, Paz gets back on his feet, with his ribs having more cracks than Stoop Dog, and leaps at the giant with his broken sword. With one slash, he manages to blind the big guy and defeats him with one final blow. However, Paz is now spitting blood and is in no condition to fight, so Irene asks Horus to take him to the hospital. Meanwhile, Gray is still outside, plotting to craft a new weapon since his Butterfingers can't handle a sword. The cat asks him to hurry up because, after Paz's forfeit, the tournament might end sooner than they thought. As the night falls, the fight between the two sides continues with damage on both sides. After several deaths and injuries, Irene only had 6 fighters left, while Caspar's army, although weaker, had the advantage of having 61 members. As the fate of Irene hangs in the balance, Paz has somewhat recovered from his injuries and is watching the events unfold from a rooftop. He realizes that 6 against 61 are shitty odds and realizes that one can't win this battle simply with their brain. Just then, Horus shows up looking for him and complains that half of his men surrendered after his forfeit. Paz reminds him that they are mercenaries who are paid for fighting, but that does not mean they will throw away their lives for money. Despite being extremely frustrated, Horus keeps calm and asks Paz about the guy who boasted about defeating 50 knights. As Paz says he has no idea where Great is, another one of Irene's men is defeated, leaving only 5 participants standing. Horus realizes he's the only one who can fight at this point and rushes back to the arena, only to hear a loud thudding sound. As he turns around with terror on his face, he notices Gray holding a door 10 times his own size. Gray asks how many men are left on Caspar's team, but people are so shocked that they'd forget to answer. As Gray sternly asks them again, Caspar starts shitting his pants while Irene sees a glimmer of hope in him. Horus then tells him that there are over 50 men on the other team, and if he can defeat them, he can have the title of a knight. With enthusiasm, Gray slams his door onto the arena and stands on top of it menacingly, prompting the other guy to surrender. When the next contestant is called, Caspar's knights start arguing among themselves because they are too scared to face Gray. Just then, Caspar asks Gray how dare he destroy his palace's door and use it as a weapon. As the people start gossiping, Caspar learns from his butler that the knights have lost their morale and would rather give up their titles than face this monster. However, they might still have a chance if they change the mode of battle to cavalry. As Gray waits for his next opponent atop the palace door, Caspar himself steps into the arena and asks him to show his cavalry skills. Just then, Irene steps in and reminds him that only the winner gets to decide how the next match will be fought. Despite that, Caspar tells her that his men won't fight until there's a horse battle, which will just delay the tournament further. Caspar then asks Gray if he accepts a horse battle, and Gray agrees on one condition: that he sends all of his men at him all at once. He says he needs to defeat 50 men to get what he wants, and since he knows most of them will run away before even facing him, this is the best solution to his problem. While Horus thinks he's a crazy bastard on drugs, Caspar is more than happy to comply, unaware of the fact that Gray is much stronger with his horse. Sensing the urgency of this battle, Irene steps up and asks Gray if he is confident in his victory. When he assures her of victory, Irene's face lights up, and she prays for his win. Just then, Tenedos makes a badass entry into the arena, prompting Caspar's knight to rally up against him. The knights are naturally confident given there is a single person on the other side, and as one of them attacks him head-on, Gray swings his sword that goes flying into the air. The knights take it as an offense and charge him down, prompting Gray to use the secret technique of Lich. After he enhances himself and Tenedos, Gray manages to defeat several knights in quick succession, sending terror down the enemy's spine. As they try to injure his horse to stop his super speed, they quickly realize that Tenedos has been buffed with magic armor. Soon after, the whole arena is filled with defeated knights, and despite all odds, Gray has managed to win it for Irene. Just then, the lady herself arrives at the arena and returns his sword, prompting him to ask if she will fulfill her end of the bargain. Irene is more than happy to make him a knight, causing the whole crowd to erupt in cheers. This marked the birth of the great knight Gray, who was going to change the future of the whole world. Some people left the scene in anger, and some people cheered for the newly made knight, but one thing is for certain, everyone was impressed by his feat. Later in the night, Irene grants him the title Knight of the Silver Moon, given how it is said to bring luck, and also because they met under the silver moon. She apologizes for a modest ceremony, and hopes Gray will fight by her side till the end, and Gray promises to be by her side till the day he dies. He is then assigned a lavish room in the castle, and as soon as he is alone, he starts dancing like he's at a Spice Girls concert, celebrating his achievement of becoming a knight. However, he quickly realizes it is too soon to celebrate, as he needs to learn a lot more. As the cat tells him to shut up so he can sleep, Gray wakes him up as he needs his advice. He mentions how the knight in the book gives all his treasure to the poor people. But the thing is, he doesn't know what a treasure is and who these poor people are. The cat tells him that everyone except Casper is poor in this town, and the castle is full of treasures he can find. With that, the cat goes back to sleep, and the very next day, he finds Gray throwing gold coins to the public like he's some Japanese Robin Hood. Turns out, this idiot stole gold coins from the castle and is now distributing them among the poor. Meanwhile, Irene is in her temporary office when her knights Abby and Horace question Gray's motives. Irene says she could use someone as strong as him, but Abby argues that they don't know anything about Gray's past, which makes him dangerous. Despite his doubts, Irene asks him to trust her decision, but just then, another knight comes running in and reveals that Gray has robbed Casper's treasury. Irene is outraged about learning this and decides to pay him a visit. Before that, she starts reminiscing about her childhood when she would train under her father's wings. She never thought of herself as a competent lord, but one quality she had was her poker face, which would make her look calm in every situation. On the way to meet Gray, Irene shows her frustration about Casper not singing the charter and Gray trying to make her life a living hell, and imagines beating them both to oblivion. Meanwhile, Caspar and his guards show up at the castle roof, where the Count accuses him of stealing. Gray innocently says he's simply distributing the treasure among the poor, not realizing that it belongs to Caspar. He uses his goldfish brain and tells him that he should written his name on the coins, or how else would he know if they belong to him. As the two continue to argue, Irene sees this from afar and uses her keen insight to turn the situation in her favor. As Caspar refuses to indulge himself in a pointless argument with Gray and demands to see his master, Irene shows up with Abby and Horace and mocks him for avoiding her. Gray immediately greets her, which pisses off the Count even further. Irene then approaches the fat pig and reminds him that the breach of contract would give her the right to deprive him of his title, which makes the fatty doo-doo his pants. He assumes Irene deliberately sent Gray to rob his treasury, but Irene simply denies any connections to the incident and promises compensation for the troubles. Seeing her in a position of power, Caspar reluctantly signs the charter but tells her to get off her high horse as she still can't fight the king. As he leaves, Gray asks her if he's done anything wrong, but Irene praises him for giving her this opportunity. She reveals she had no right to deprive the Count of his title before she became the Grand Duke, but Gray's actions allowed her to play that bluff. However, she soon comes back to her usual self and tells Gray not to steal again, or she will have to deduct it from his salary. Furthermore, since they got what they wanted, there is no need for them to stay here anymore, which is why she asks Gray to pack up and accompany her to the White City tomorrow. As she makes her exit, Gray asks the cat what a salary is, but he is more focused on what kind of a maniac Irene is to have Gray on her side. The next day, the squad leaves for the White City, and when the night falls, they decide to set up camp between the mountains. After a while, a knight comes looking for Gray and tells him that Horace has demanded his presence in Lady Irene's tent. Meanwhile, Horace is furious in the tent and refuses to accept Irene's orders. She wants both Horace and Abby to visit different lords and use Caspar's character to make them join her side. However, Horace is worried that she will be left alone with Gray, who is untrustworthy and might harm Irene behind their backs. She has had enough of their worries and says that Gray is so strong that even if he wanted to harm her, there would be nothing they could do to stop him. Just then, Gray arrives at the tent and hears Irene asking them to act as messengers to expand their camp. As soon as he enters, he is met with death stares from both Horace and Abby, making him wonder if he's done something stupid again. However, they simply tell him they are counting on him for Lady Irene's safety while they are gone and leave the camp. However, Gray is so freaking stupid that he thinks Safety is the name of Irene's pet and even contemplates asking her where Safety is. Noticing his discomfort, Irene asks him if he is nervous, but Gray replies that he does not know what to do. She gums it down for him, stating that his job is to stand at the door and take down anyone who tries to attack her. After some time, Ari mentions how Gray hasn't taken his helmet off once and didn't even remember his oaths during his night-making ceremony, making her believe he is from a different country. When she jokes about Gray being inhuman, the man starts sweating despite only being a skull and bones, and Irene takes note of his reaction. However, she tells him not to worry about his past, as she is responsible for him from the moment he pledged his allegiance to her. As he promises to be loyal to her forever, she asks her to be ready to welcome some uninvited guests. Just then, a man in a purple robe enters the tent in order to execute Irene. This man is named Spectre, who belongs to a headhunter group called the Ravens. These Ravens usually take money to execute anyone from poor to royalties, but Spectre is a fearsome assassin who happens to be a fan of the Joker and targets people for fun.
Batman, I caught a little Pokemon.
As Spectre rushes in to attack Irene, Gray literally throws his sword in his face and knocks him down. As Spectre recovers from this unexpected tactic, Gray notices that his evil aura is much higher than that of the Great Lich, making him wonder if he's a necromancer of a veteran murderer. As Spectre rushes him down at tremendous speeds, Gray finds himself decimated before he can even react. Spectre starts laughing like a maniac, thinking that he's won, but his victory is short-lived as Gray laughs back at him and makes him realize that his sword is broken into pieces. For a moment, Gray was actually scared that he might have been cut to pieces, but thinking that Spectre lied to him, he starts slapping him like an angry Karen. As Spectre gets his teeth knocked out of his mouth, Irene can't help but be surprised at the sheer idiocy of both of them. She had realized that Spectre broke his sword on the first attack, and then continued to swing like a dumbass, but not he nor Gray realized that until the very end. Regardless, she tells Gray to give this sorry bloke the boot, but Gray asks if she already knew if an assassin was coming for her. Irene reveals that this is an average Tuesday for her, and her rivals send assassins her way every 3 days, much to Gray's shock. She figures Gray had no idea about her situation and only joined her to become a knight, so she thinks it's best if she explains the situation to him. She reveals that her father, the Grand Duke of the Becker House, passed away unexpectedly and left a will that his only child, which was Irene, will inherit the title and the property. However, a man named Jones, who claimed to be an illegitimate son of the Duke, appeared and demanded the rights. According to the law, an illegitimate son had no right to inheritance, but the main problem was that Jones was brought out by the king, who is basically above all law. He had the power to grant Jones anything he wanted, which included the right to inherit the Becker family. This was an obvious conspiracy against Irene, who realized that the king wanted to take control of the Becker family in a non-lethal manner. Many people were afraid of the power the king held and refused to help even when they knew it was unjust. Others saw this as an opportunity to make a living and help the feudal lords take advantage of the situation. All in all, ever since the Duke passed away, people wanted his 16-year-old daughter to disappear from the world. Hence, assassination became a routine for her. After explaining her story, Irene and her squad finally arrive at the White City, the capital of Becker. As the city prepares to welcome her, a noble blonde is watching this from her window and shows interest in meeting this new knight that Irene found during her visit to the port. As Irene enters her city, people seem to already be aware of this legendary Silver Moon Knight, who is rumored to outmatch 100 knights. The cat asks Gray if he understood anything Irene said to her last night, but Gray is still unfamiliar with many words of human language, such as illegitimate son or inheritance, meaning he still has no clue what he is up for. However, one thing he is sure of is that he will have to fight the king one day and defeat him to keep his title. As he takes a look around the city, he notices how lively the place is and how much people respect him for protecting their leader. Irene says the liveliness of this place is what is so dear to her, which is why she must protect it from falling into the king's hands. She further says she wants to reward Gray with new armor and a warhorse and asks if he has a specific requirement. She explains to a terrified Gray that he is an important part of the Becker family and his attire must stand out, which is why they will need his weight, proportions, and other things to make sure his armor fits. Additionally, Irene needs to invite nobles to a ball to tell them that she's returned safely, and since Gray has been promoted to a guardian knight from here on out, he must attend the party with her. Meanwhile, a white angelic woman is flying in the sky and notices an immature lich among the people, who happens to be none other than Gray. However, despite confirming Gray's identity as an undead, she is asked not to take any action as per the Greystone Agreement, which refrains them from harming liches unless they mutilate humans. At night, Gray is delighted to see his bright shining armor delivered to his room, and Irene is so generous with him that the armorer only measured the previous armor's shell size and made the new one without Gray having to remove it. The cat then reminds him that he still has to attend the ball, and as expected, the illiterate undead has no idea what that is. The cat explains that a ball is sort of a party where everyone dances, but the man doesn't even know what dancing is. The cat then demonstrates some of his sick moves, and the two start dancing like they're auditioning for a bad reality TV show.
What the dog doing?
Just then, they hear a knock at the door, and Gray quickly jumps into the new armor to answer it. He finds Irene's maid on the door, who informs him that the lady is waiting for him. As she guides him to Irene, Gray develops an extra bone in his body upon seeing her sheer beauty. However, in reality, he is a Jiga Chad who is getting excited over the high-quality fabric she is wearing. She then asks Gray if he is ready and lends out her hand so he can help her get downstairs. Gray, being all bones and no brain, does not understand the gesture and asks the cat for help. After he finally holds her hand, he compliments her gown and asks if he can wear it. She questions her choice of fashion considering he's a man, but he doesn't even know what a man is. Gray almost reveals his identity, until the cat knocks some senses into him, prompting him to ask Irene to forget about this conversation. However, given how Gray refuses to take his armor off and doesn't like talking about his past, Irene wonders if Gray's got more estrogen than she initially thought. Nevertheless, the duo arrives at the ball, and while everyone bows in respect, they can't help but gossip about Gray, who's achieved so much fame in a matter of days. Irene then welcomes everyone to the hall and aims to not only improve her relations with the attending families, but also resolve the previous issues regarding their family name in one meeting. As she sips her wine, Shelley, the same noble blonde from before, mocks his granddad for being the one who disagrees with Irene. Gray asks Irene who that man is, and she introduces him as Gregory III of Atwood, who possesses immense wealth and a great military force, both of which are essential in their battle against the king. Unfortunately, Gregory has already denied her request for aid, but since he is here tonight, it means there might be a chance to win him over. Just then, Irene walks up to Gregory and asks him for a dance, hoping to woo her away into his pockets and pants if necessary. As Gray starts following her like the good puppy that he is, Gregory's granddaughter, Shelley, tells him not to interfere in their dance. She thinks Gray wants to dance with someone and asks if he will join her. The cat suspects the woman is being clever and asks Gray to keep his distance, but Gray is an idiot and takes the most literal meaning of those words. When Shelley starts crying thinking Gray has rejected her, the cat quickly figures out she's trying to make a scene and asks him to compliment her. Despite not wanting to lie, he is forced to call her the baddest, beautiful woman in the world and agrees to dance with her. However, it was all part of her grand strategy to hit the sheets and wants to see what Gray is hiding under that helmet. However, the cat isn't too worried as he knows she will regret making Gray dance with her. As they begin their dance, Gray keeps stepping on Shelley's feet and apologizes, stating it is his first time dancing. As he and Shelley enjoy their not-so-elegant dance routine, Gregory takes note of Gray and questions why he is still wearing that armor. Irene mentions that it is simply a habit of his and then asks him if he would reconsider his decision regarding her request. Gregory says he has no doubt Irene is more than capable of becoming a lord, but his family tradition of only supporting the stronger party prevents him from lending her a hand. Meanwhile, as Gray gets the hand of dancing, Shelley asks him if he would like to take a walk with her. After he agrees, the two leave the hall and Shelley, being the pick, shows him the strain on her foot which came from Gray stepping on her. When Gray apologizes, she asks him to find some medicine and apply it for her. The cat quickly realizes that Shelley is trying to flirt with Gray, but Gray ignores him and heals her foot with magic, much to Shelley's surprise. Just then, a man with a bouquet and a broken heart arrives at the scene and sees Gray holding Shelley's foot. Thinking of him as a shameless bastard, he challenges him to a duel, but the cat asks him to dissolve this situation because he belongs to the same family Irene is trying to win over. Meanwhile, the white angelic lady notices Gray's diving magic abilities and finds it rather interesting. Irene and Gregory hear some disturbance outside, and just then a knight comes running in and informs her that Gray has insulted Lady Shelley of the Gregory family. Heading outside, the man who showed up with the bouquet accuses Gray of humiliating Shelley and even urges Shelley to tell everyone what he did to her. However, Shelley tells him he's got the wrong idea and that Gray was only trying to heal her foot. However, the man thinks she's being kind and argues that no medicine in the world is capable of healing this fast, as he doesn't see a scar. When he says Gray must have deceived her, the people start gossiping about him. He urges Gray to explain himself or he will not only lose his title but also his reputation. Just then, Irene arrives with Horace and Gregory and asks them what's going on. While Gray is clueless because he does not understand words, the other guy says he saw Gray trying to get in Shelley's pants. While Gregory is furious, Irene asks him to hold his horses and let the others explain what they saw. She asks Gray first, who reveals he had injured Shelley's foot during their dance, and he was simply trying to heal it. When Shelley asks him to use the same magic he did earlier, he needs to recover before using it again. Turns out, his hand was burned off after using divine magic, and in reality, it will take him several days to recover. If he were to burn off his other hand as well, he would be unable to control the armor, which in turn would expose his identity. The man then accuses him of lying and assumes that Gray must have threatened Shelley to lie on his behalf, leaving Gregory disappointed. However, Irene says he has full faith in her knight and will get to the bottom of this, promising to punish the guy who is slandering the reputation of her knights. Gregory is furious and leaves the ball after asking Irene to stay out of his family matters. The next day, the White City welcomes the army of Count Felder, who has agreed to aid Irene in her cause. With the military of 3 counts under Irene's command, Horace seems to be confident in their position. However, Irene is taken aback by this sudden development and smells something fishy. She then asks about the man who accused Gray of harassing Shelley, and Horace reveals that the man is Matthew of the Modine family, who has a crush on Shelley and accused Gray out of jealousy. With that, Irene and Horace head down and welcome Felder to their city. After greetings, Felder asks if Gregory has made a decision yet, and when Irene tells him what happened, he suggests tying him up and beating him into submission. When Ernie politely asks him to do no such thing, he gives her a playful smack and says that he's only joking. However, he mentions that some people do not care about reasoning and will only make a decision when they are desperate. Just then, Irene notices a wagon in the background, and Felder reveals his son Jimmy is traveling in it. He explains that Jimmy has been sick lately, and the doctors have advised him to stay away from sunlight, hence the wagon. When she approaches the wagon to meet Jimmy, the boy turns out to be a sinister-looking boy with white hair, much like her own. However, she overlooks that and apologizes to Jimmy for making him and his father travel so far. After that, Irene asks his uncle to come inside and rest, since they have traveled a lot. Later in the evening, Horace and Abby are in Irene's office discussing how their situation has improved a lot with help from Count Felder. When Irene does not show any interest in the matter, Horace asks her to speak her mind, prompting her to mention the convenient timings of Felder's arrival. She also mentions how Felder's son, although very cute, looks nothing like him and even has white hair. Meanwhile, Matthew visits Felder and explains how he never expected Irene to offend the Gregory family and take her knight's side. Begging for another chance, he promises Felder that he will do whatever it takes to remove Gray from the Becker's camp. Meanwhile, Gray is in his room making a list of things he wants to do as a knight. He recalls all the vows Irene made him take during his ceremony and reveals that whenever Liches swear on something, they must do it. This is why he needs to keep up with those vows and starts by deciding to help anyone who asks for his aid. Donning his armor, he leaves for the town, but much to his surprise, he is met with hostility from the people who think low of him after the incident with Shelley. As people throw loads of tomatoes at his face, the cat explains that some people have started spreading false rumors about him in the city. However, Gray doesn't give a single damn about these people, stating that if they don't care enough to find the truth, their opinion ain't worth. Heading into the local market, when he is met with hostile eyes, the cat asks him to be a teacher's pet and rat the people out to Irene. Just then, a boy with crocodile tears and dirt on his face comes running to him for help. And since that's what he wants to do anyway, Gray agrees to help immediately. Soon after, Shelley is in her wagon when the driver tells her that they should take the other road as this one is blocked by the crowd. When she asks what's happening, the driver mentions that the commotion is caused by the Silver Moon Knight. Meanwhile, the little boy tells Gray that some gangster kidnapped her sister and demanded that he must bring the Silver Moon Knight to them in exchange for her release. The cat asks Gray to reconsider, as this is obviously a trap. However, this is exactly why Gray wants to face these kidnappers. Upon arriving at the location, Gray and Tenedos are both weirded out to see that they have to face a bunch of kids led by the one named Nania. When the boy demands her sister back, Manhwa throws her off a height, prompting Gray to rush to her rescue. After catching the girl, he questions if the kids plan on attacking him without weapons, but just then, the boy who called for his help and Manhwa both start shouting that Gray has kidnapped a girl. Even the girl is in on this and starts shouting for help, making him realize he is in some deep. Soon after, the locals start attacking Gray, and even the people who gave him the benefit of the doubt earlier are now convinced that he is a horrible person. On the other hand, the boys who trapped Gray run back to the alley and are super excited since they will be paid a lot of money and their father won't have to work so hard. However, Shelley and her driver hear this and ask the boy who offered them money in exchange for this act. Meanwhile, Gray and his cat are talking a walk of shame like Cersei Lannister and are forced into the castle where Irene will judge them. However, Shelley and her guards stop them along the way and the people start gossiping about how kind she has been to commoners like them. Shelley jokingly asks if they are holding some kind of an event, but the man tells her that they are punishing the knight who insulted her. However, when she says they are mistaken as Gray merely helped her, the man says everyone has been talking about it in the city and Gray was even caught harassing a little girl today. She asks to speak with the girl, and when she is presented in front of Shelley, she cleverly takes the wig off to reveal that it is a boy posing as a girl. The whole crowd is shocked by this revelation, and Shelley asks her guards to bring out the other kids as well. She then says these kids are just the victims of rumors, and makes them admit that this whole thing was just a prank. After she clears Gray's name in public, she tells the people that Gray is not only a knight, but also a part of the baronetcy, and by tying him up like this, they have insulted the baron himself. This means that Gray has the right to sanction these people, and when he uses that right, the people start begging him for forgiveness. However, Gray menacingly tells them that a punishment must come their way, which just so happens to be a sign telling the people that he is an honorable knight. Shelley bursts into laughter upon hearing this, and the people, who know they have been let off, easily agree to do as asked. On the other hand, Felder is disappointed in Matthew for wasting his second chance. After the commotion is dissolved, Gray thanks Shelley for stepping up to save his sorry ass. She says she was merely returning the favor and urges him to discuss the matter with Irene. She also reveals that the person responsible for throwing dirt on his name is none other than Matthew of the Modine family, the same guy who was after him on the ball night. Shelley believes Matthew wants to alienate him and Irene, so she suggests they do a background check on the guy. The cat suspects something fishy, because Shelley's grandfather refused to help Irene and pushes Gray to ask her why she is helping them. When he does so, she says that she is risking dragging her family into a war, but since Gray is a miserable clown, she is fine with taking the chance. With that, she parts ways with Drag and heads to the theater. However, in a matter of seconds, Matthew shows up from the dark and restrains her, stating that despite him going out of his way to keep her out of the war, she went ahead and helped the night, which ended with his lord abandoning him. He says the only way for him to redeem himself is to eliminate the Silver Moon Knight, and orders him to decimate his own limbs in exchange for Shelley's safety. Shelley is certain this won't work, because there is no way Gray would do that for her, but despite that, Gray pulls off his left arm, much to everyone's horror. Before Matthew can absorb the shock, Gray uses this opportunity to throw his arm at his face and knocks him out. He then reveals that he retracted his arm back into the armor to make it look like he cut his arm, when in fact, he merely cut his gauntlet. As the guards restrain Matthew, Shelley thanks Gray for saving her life, but Gray says it's no big deal as anyone in his position would do the same. Matthew is furious upon getting caught, but hints at the fact that Gregory's life is in danger and she will be holding his corpse very soon. In the night, Gregory finds himself restrained by a bunch of thugs, who not only raided his mansion but executed every guard in it. As their leader intimidates him by playing Fruit Ninja with him, he mentions that they are all alone in the mansion, which means they will have plenty of time to talk. After some playing with the food act, the leader gets to the point and says Gregory needs to write a letter to the fief asking them to send troops to support the Becker family. Gregory is certain Irene did not send these thugs, and despite the death looming over his head, he refuses to do as asked. When the leader threatens to execute him, Gregory shows no fear as he understands how strong his position is in this case. Even if they were to execute him, his son will inherit his title according to the will, which is proved by the archbishop, meaning even the king can't interfere with it. He also figures it was Felder who sent these thugs to threaten him and mock his choice of men. Meanwhile, in Irene's castle, she and Felder are about to discuss the distribution of troops. Before they can start, a knight enters the room and informs Felder that a messenger is waiting for him outside the castle. As he leaves the room, Irene gets suspicious and asks Abby to send a spy of their own to follow Felder's messenger. Outside, Felder receives a letter from his men that Gregory has figured out he sent them after him, but despite that, he tells his guide to go back and continue as planned. As he returns to Irene, she asks what the matter is, but Felder brushes it off as a trivial matter with the fiefdom. However, Irene reveals that due to the threat of war, their city has been under martial law, meaning the city gates are closed at night. She asks him how his messenger managed to enter the city, leaving Felder speechless. Back in the Gregory mansion, the thugs wait for their messenger to show up, but they are surprised by Shelley's appearance. As Shelley enters the main hall with Gray's cat, she is surprised to see the lights turned off and is annoyed that no one came to greet her. However, before she can assess the situation, Shelley is restrained by the bandit leader, who throws her right next to Gregory. The man then admits he can't harm Gregory because he needs him to write that letter, but nothing is stopping him from having some fun with Shelley. Gregory is fuming like a boiling kettle and threatens to chop his sausage if he ever so lays eyes on her. However, the man knows these are empty threats and proceeds to grab Shelley from the floor. He then removes the tape from her face because torturing would not be fun if he couldn't hear her voice. However, Shelley couldn't care less because, in her book, a toddler's threats pack more punch than his. When she mocks him for being a bad guy, he literally claps the wind out of her cheeks and knocks her down. Despite his threats to give Shelley a mini Shelley, the woman remains as stubborn as ever. Just then, the talking Tom steps in and scratches the man's face, followed by him summoning Gray inside the house. Before Shelley walked directly into the trap, Gray escorted her to the mansion and immediately figured something was wrong because all the lights were off. Gray wanted to rush in and save Gregory, but Shelley informed him that there were a lot of rooms in the mansion, and they would be in a lot of trouble if they didn't locate his location first. To increase their chances of success, Shelley decided to enter the mansion alone and let the kidnappers think they had the upper hand. Gray asks Shelley to take his cat with her, and when the cat asks what he is planning to do, Gray hands him an amulet he stole from the Great Lich. This amulet allowed Gray to teleport to its location after the cat slammed it onto the ground. As the bandit leader is left in shock, Shelley is certain Gray has some sort of a connection with the Holy Spirit. As Gray sanctions them in the name of the Holy Spirit, the white angel who has been observing him for a while sneezes, hinting at her own connection to the said entity. The guards are well aware of Gray's identity, but had too much coffee this morning and rushed him down in hopes of outnumbering him. After dodging an incoming attack at the very last second, Gray once again throws his sword like a freaking idiot and uses a technique called Illuminating Beam Chain to defeat all of his opponents. After Gregory and Shelley are rescued, the old man replays the whole thing in his head, from Gray's sudden appearance to the illuminating chains. He is certain that Gray is using magic and reveals how the only person in the world who can freely use magic is the Holy Order's Paladin. Assuming Irene called in a favor from the Holy Order, Gregory can't help but wonder why she kept this news private. This urges him to re-examine the Becker family's abilities, which might also change his mind about what side to take during the upcoming war. Meanwhile, Gray asks Shelley what he should do with these thugs, and Shelley tells him to leave it to her. She then addresses the leader by his name Eddie, which surprises him. Shelley reveals she's read too many Sherlock Holmes novels and proceeds to reveal Eddie's address along with his family members. When he begs her not to harm his family, she says she has nothing against them and is only mentioning this because if she can get information about him, so can the man who sent him. And since he has failed this critical mission, Eddie's family might be in danger from his own employer. As Eddie realizes his messed up situation, Shelley gives him two choices. One is to reveal the man who sent them, and the second one is to die here to protect their family. Eddie says his family will be doomed the moment he decides to go against his employer and asks her to not harm his family. He then bites the poison capsule he had hidden under his teeth and dies on the spot. Just then, Gregory notices that the Becker family, with a whole squadron of knights, has arrived at their mansion to check up on them. He figures they must have followed the messenger who brought the letter from Felder and decides to talk to Irene himself, possibly because he now wants to help her against the king. Meanwhile, Irene asks Felder if he wants to come clean, but this man just refuses to back down. When Irene says she did not authorize the use of force against the Gregorys, he replies she didn't oppose it either. As Irene shows her disapproval regarding Felder's ways, he claims he is putting himself at risk by supporting her and that she should be thankful to him. Irene leaves the room in frustration, and Abby is furious because this act by Felder puts dirt on their name. He asks Irene to not be polite to him, but she tells him to stay calm as they can't risk an inner conflict at this stage of the war. She then inquires about Gregory's health, and Abby tells her that the Silver Moon Knight, after being targeted by Felder, managed to find the old Count's place and rescue both him and Shelley. Abby also reveals that Gregory is waiting for them in the lounge, prompting Irene to head straight to him. Once there, they discuss Felder's situation and Irene explains that he did what he did to intimidate the Gregory family. However, when she says she worries that Felder might be the king's rat, Gregory reveals that this matter could have caused civil unrest, which would give the king an excuse to send troops here. When he asks why she suspects Felder, Irene reveals it's because he brought his only child to the city who looks nothing like him. His white hair is extremely rare in the kingdom, and only the Becker family has such traits in their bloodline. They suspect that Jimmy is the illegitimate son of Irene's father, but they cannot understand why Felder would risk bringing him here. Meanwhile, Felder enters Jimmy's room, who's watching the red moon like a big shot villain, and asks Felder why he's visiting him this late in the night. In a surprising twist, Felder takes a knee to Jimmy and apologizes for disturbing him at this hour. Jimmy then asks why he's here, and Felder reveals that the Silver Moon Knight has sabotaged all of their plans since the beginning of Port Hamlet. Felder explains that Gray has popped out of nowhere, and even though he acts like a child, he is quite powerful and resilient. What makes him annoying is his loyalty towards Irene, which is why they need to make him vanish. Understanding the trouble Gray has been causing, Jimmy reveals his vampire form and decides to take this matter into his own hands. Just then, the angel named Catherine, who has been observing Gray, takes note of the situation and asks for permission to dispose of Jimmy. However, her master tells her not to get involved until Jimmy harms a human. The angel is frustrated and blames her master for being too overprotective of these deviants, but he reminds her that they have to follow the agreement to avoid chaos. However, Catherine has a bad feeling that more and more demons will show up in the human world if they continue to follow this agreement. The next day, Irene, Felder, and Gregory are discussing more strategies, and Felder comments that they can widen their defense line due to the addition of Gregory's army. However, Gregory is still not over the fact that Felder tried to threaten him and wants to stay clear of his men. As they engage in a mock battle, little Jimmy comes running into the room and Felder swings him around like a father does to his son in an Oscar-worthy performance. Jimmy says his father hasn't given him any playtime ever since he got here, but Felder says he is super busy and he should find someone else to play with. Jimmy cleverly points at Gray and takes him to the underground segment of the castle. Once they arrive in the dungeon, Gray questions Jimmy's choice of playground, unaware of the fact that Shelley has joined them too. When Jimmy says she didn't invite her to play, she simply says she was too bored in the meeting and wanted to play as well. Jimmy brushes her off and explains the game called The Brave and the Dragon. A long time ago, an evil dragon was living in the dungeon and kidnapped a princess with white hair, which led to the wrath of the locals. Eventually, a brave warrior rose from the people and executed the dragon. Just then, Jimmy uses a magic technique called the Eye of the Illusionist and assigns the warriors and the dragon's roles to Shelley and Gray respectively. Jimmy then declares them mortal enemies and orders them to fight each other to death for the princess. However, the tension in the air is dissolved in a split second as Gray, in his senses, says that he wants to be the dragon instead. Jimmy is shocked to see his trick fail, revealing that only those with higher magic than him are immune to it. Turns out the cat is the one who's been affected by the illusion, prompting him to smack Gray into the ground. Realizing it was just a mishap, Jimmy tries to use the trick again, only to realize that it really does not work on Gray. Just then, Shelley, who is under hypnosis, arrives with a brick in her hand and calls Jimmy the princess. Since the princess had white hair in Jimmy's story, he is the one who's been assigned that role automatically due to his white hair. While Gray is busy dealing with the cat, Shelley walks up to them and knocks them both out. Afterward, she turns her attention toward Princess Jimmy, and it is said that the screams of a certain teenager echoed the dungeons all day long. Sometime later, as doctors rush to Shelley's room, Irene asks Gray why she fell into a coma after going on a trip with him and Jimmy. Gray says it is not just Shelley, but the cat has also been unconscious, and he can't figure out what the reason is. As they contemplate what to do, Abby returns with the doctor's report and reveals that they were affected by black magic, which can only be treated by a priest from the church. Irene immediately suspects Jimmy and realizes that Gray wasn't affected thanks to the protection of the Holy Spirit. making him the perfect candidate to deal with Jimmy. Meanwhile, a female vampire named Dora flies into Jimmy's room, only to find him crying like a When she asks who bullied the little guy, Jimmy says he was threatened by a girl with a brick who even hugged him in front of the public. Feeling embarrassed, Jimmy vows revenge on Shelley, but Dora makes fun of him for acting like a girl. Furious, Jimmy blames Felder for dragging him into the mess and worries that Shelley will find out his secret if he is not careful. While Jimmy is fuming like a hot kettle, Dora tells him not to worry too much as she is more than ready to eliminate anyone he wants. However, Jimmy gives her the housewife treatment and reminds her that they cannot take the initiative as per their agreement with the Holy Spirit. He further says how his actions have been a little suspicious, meaning some angel might already be observing him. As he discusses his plan to eliminate Gray, he takes his sip of the blood Dora brought him and immediately spits it out. Turns out the blood reeks of alcohol, prompting Dora to reveal she can only take out blood from drunkards as it draws less suspicion. She further reveals how things are so strict that the Northern Blood clan has not shifted to pig blood for survival. Jimmy is shocked to hear this and vows to revive the Great Blood race once again. Just then, Prade shows up in his armor and reveals he's been asked to play with him as per Irene's orders. He also says the game they played the last time was too dangerous, and now they'll be playing a new game where he will be Jimmy's sugar daddy. As Gray removes the curtains from the windows, his whole room is filled with sunlight, and unlike the vampires of the Twilight trilogy, Jimmy is on the verge of being burnt to a crisp. Gray realizes Jimmy's discomfort and shuts the curtains once again. However, he still wants to play the Big Daddy and asks Jimmy to prepare himself for a tour of the city. Despite his protests, Gray is hell-bent on following Irene's orders and punches a hole in the wall simply with the wind force. He says he has permission to disciple Jimmy by beating him up, so if he refuses to leave his room, who knows what will happen. Jimmy is naturally terrified of Gray's sheer strength and agrees to go horse riding. As they roam around the city, he notices some kids arguing with each other. These are the same kids who tried to frame him for harassing a girl, and the boy who led him to the trap steps and apologized to him for setting him up. These children are all orphans raised by the church, and when the city started preparing for war, the church eventually ran out of funds. This is why the kids tried to frame Gray for a small profit, but instead of punishing them, Gray donated all of his belongings to the church, which earned him the respect. Gray says it's no big deal as he was simply doing what a knight should do, but since no one else ever gave a damn about these kids, they are inspired by Gray want to become knights when they grow up. Gray, being the idiot that he is, says there is no need to wait until they grow up and suggests creating a knightly order with them. As he takes them back to the church, he introduces his brand new son Jimmy to the kids, who express their wish to be adopted by him. Gray probably doesn't even understand what the word means and claims that all of them are his sons from now on. Returning to the church, he tells the pastor that he wants to make these kids knights. The man, thinking Gray is merely playing, asks him to come inside the church. As Gray steps inside, his life flashes before his eyes as he sees the angel Catherine praying. Following that, Gray makes the kids say the vows to become a knight and pledge his allegiance. He then grants them the sacred title of knight and promises to protect them for as long as they keep their oath. While the kids are ecstatic, he promises to arrange horses and armor and start their training tomorrow. However, they still need to think of a name for their knightly order. While they are at it, Gray puts his brain cells on his current state, thinking how he can't believe how he got here so fast. In reality, this is all a ruse to distract himself from the fact that he is in the room with an angle that can wipe him out in an instant. Gray starts panicking and looks for a way to escape, only for Catherine to speak out and say that she won't harm him as long he doesn't hurt anyone. She says she is just curious and wants to have a chat with him, prompting them to sit awkwardly on a bench like an arranged marriage couple. She then asks Gray why he wants to become a knight, knowing all too well it does not fit with the teachings of a lich. Gray, with the enthusiasm of a teenager, says it's super cool to be a knight, and he gets to meet legends every day. Not only that, but he also gets a lot of respect from people, which is the best thing for him. Although Catherine thinks it is a naive reason, she says being a knight may sound cool but is not so easygoing. One day, Gray might lose the respect of these people and his lord might start questioning his decisions, which will only make him miserable. When she asks if he would still enjoy being a knight in those conditions, Gray, being an ultimate Tier 3 simp of Irene, bolts out of there claiming Lady Angel should get to know Irene first before making speculations. As he's about to leave, the pastor comes running at him and thanks him for his help. He says the kids were super naughty before, but now they are reading the holy book on their own, all thanks to Gray. As he earns the respect and approval of the Holy Order, he questions if the pastor will apply him for the Holy Order's seal of cross. The pastor, however, wants Gray to give further donations to the church, prompting him to rush to the tavern. Later in the night, Dora visits Jimmy and notices that he is absolutely exhausted thanks to his trip with Gray. When she asks what happened, Jimmy starts ranting like a girl on her period, explaining everything Gray put him through. As Dora holds back her laughter, Jimmy bursts into tears, prompting her to give him a hug. Since Gray is being too much of a nuisance, she asks Jimmy if they should take the throne by force, but Jimmy says they will have to endure it for the sake of the rival of the blood race. Meanwhile, Gray is in the tavern winning big money, and as he leaves with a bag full of silver coins, an old drunkard comes to him and asks him to give his money back. Gray gives him 100 silver coins to shoo off, but some other gamblers use this as an opportunity to get free money out of him. Given how much of an idiot he is, Gray is left with only 2 silver coins and decides to donate them to the church. Once he gets there, he is greeted by his training knights who decided on the name Super Invincible Order of the Silver Moon, and even spent all night creating a banner. The kids are ready to train until one of them asks if Gray's son is coming or not, prompting Gray to go back to the castle and fetch Jimmy. A few days later, Dora visits Jimmy once again, who is more depressed than an average American, and lists the things Gray put him through the past few days. Having enough of his torture, Jimmy asks Dora to tell the king to send his troops, prompting her to remind him of what he said earlier. Frustrated, Jimmy yells out that the situation has changed, and he would rather take the throne by force than be tortured to death. A few days later, a messenger reveals that King Baird has gathered his army near Lion's capital and is heading towards the border of the Duchy of Becker. Meanwhile, Jimmy's torture continues, prompting the king to take drastic measures to reach the White City, leaving Irene, Felder, and Gregory confused. After some time, Dora visits the king again and asks him to hurry it up. Baird argues that they will be exhausted by the time they reach the city, but Dora bribes him with the power of immortality, which leads him go through swamps and snowy weather to reach his destination. Meanwhile, in the White City, Irene has put on her battle suit and is ready to address her subjects. Once she motivates her men to protect their homeland, Felder is distracted to see a bunch of kids in the army. Just then, his fellow knight Mike reveals that these kids are brought by the Silver Moon Knight and are a part of his order. As the kids pose like the Caesar X Squad to make their presence known, Felder can't help but be shocked at the absurdity of this situation. Later, Felder reports this to Irene, and Gray is summoned alongside his order to explain the situation. Irene asks if their parents have given their consent for them to march into battle, but the kids reveal they are orphans, and the pastor has agreed to let them be under Gray's command. Seeing their enthusiasm, she says she looks forward to seeing them in action, but politely asks them to leave the room as she has to discuss something with Gray. As soon as they leave, Irene asks Gray to send these sorry losers back to the church. When he argues that they are a part of his order, Irene says she can't let a bunch of kids die on a battlefield. When Gray says he will protect them, Irene questions if he is even aware of what a war is like, which ignites an argument between the two. Later in the night, Gray is out of his armor hiding in the stables, prompting Tenedos to ask if he is okay. Gray reveals he made Irene upset, so she sent him away to review his actions. He then reveals how, according to him, a battlefield is a place where people achieve merit and glory. Irene, however, thought he was extremely selfish and was dragging a bunch of kids in his arrogant desires. She said war is full of bloodshed corpses, and the only reason people go to war is to protect their children, which is the exact opposite of what Gray is doing. Gray, oblivious as ever, continued to argue that those kids have great potential and that he would protect them no matter what. Irene just about had enough of his bull and grabbed him by the collar, revealing that he will the bed as soon as he sees tens of thousands of men marching toward him. She says people will scatter in war, and since those kids have no way to protect themselves, they will end up dying. Now Gray is an undead, so he argues that death is not so bad, but Irene doesn't know this and kicks him out of the room. Gray does not know what he did wrong, so Tenedos knocks some sense into him. He says being alive is something that is very important to humans, as they have hopes and dreams that they want to achieve. Being alive means eating delicious foods, smelling flowers, feeling the wind on one's face, and whatnot. But all these beautiful things are taken away as soon as one becomes an undead. Gray finally gets that he was about to deprive these kids of the beautiful things attached to life, which made Irene upset. When he asked what he can do to understand humans better, Tenedos advises him to go to the tavern and use his magic to taste different kinds of foods. As he walks towards the tavern with a new understanding of life, he notices the same man he lent money to being mean to his wife. She's asking him not to gamble with the last of their family's money, but the man brushes it off and hopes to turn his life around with this money. As Gray steps up to help the woman, the man recognizes him and blames him for this situation. He says it's Gray's fault for giving him money because it made him gamble, which led to him being in debt and losing 2 of his fingers. He demands more money from Gray as consolation, and even though Gray agrees, the man's wife begs him not to give away any more money. Ignoring her pleas, Gray gives him the 2 silver coins he has left on him, but the man throws them away and asks him to give more as he is a nobleman. The old man then grabs Gray by the collar and blames him for his condition, making Gray realize that this situation is nothing like the one he read in the books. Meanwhile, a messenger reveals that the king's army has advanced out of the snowy mountains and has finally arrived at the Becker's doorstep. The day of the war is finally upon them, so Irene gives a brief on the situation. Baird is currently stationed across the river and has brought about 40,000 troops. In comparison, Irene's forces are only half in number. She worries that the king will have around 100,000 troops after Baird receives aid from the supporting nobles. The number between the 2 forces is quite large, which is why they must keep the king on the other side of the river. Gregory steps in and says numbers aren't the only thing that can win wars. Timing, location, and manpower are all the factors they must not overlook. He mentions that Baird has been marching for half a month, meaning his soldiers will be exhausted at this point. Also, it happens to be the rainy season in the Duchy of Becker, and if the king were to wait 2 more days, the river would be soaring in heavy rain, making it almost impossible to cross. His golden armored knights are not so familiar with the terrain, and the muddy riverbank will only make their lives tougher. Hearing from the expert gives Irene hope for her land. Meanwhile, Felder and his men have already taken high grounds on both sides of the river and are ready to crush Baird's forces on command. Irene suggests this is the best time to attack, so they can capture the king alive and win this battle. As she, Gregory, and Felder head to the battlefield, Abby reminds Irene that Gray is nowhere to be found. Irene is still upset with him and tells Abby to let him off, as he would join the battlefield if he is true to his word. Additionally, Abby tells him that Shelley has woken up from his coma and has asked him to keep this news private. According to Shelley, Jimmy is capable of doing black magic and is most likely not human. If what she says is true, this means this war is not just between humans. Meanwhile, despite the alarms going off, Gray is a sitting duck inside the tavern. Just then, the cat shows up and tells him what he did wrong with that drunkard. When Gray fails to understand, the cat gives him a live demonstration of a courtesan being bullied by her customers. Naturally, Gray would want to help her, but in this case, this would cause her to lose her job. On the other hand, a musician is being drenched by some junkies, but if Gray were to help the man, he would also lose his job. Sometimes, when you simply do what you think is right, without thinking of the consequences, the people you help end up resenting you. Gray understands what the cat is saying but is still confused about what he should do, as he doesn't really understand humans as he does. The cat says that no one really knows what to do in this world, and Gray is probably the only knight who takes his oath of valor seriously. Struggling with his identity, Gray is unsure of how he can become a better knight. On the other hand, the war between the 2 factions is about to begin. Will Gray give up on the idea of becoming a knight, or will he find it in himself to push on? That is it for this video. Leave a thumbs up if you liked the video and subscribe to the channel for similar content. And as always, thanks for watching.